first two videos in this series, I took a look at Art Asylum's offerings based on the crew and the aliens of Star Trek the original series. Today I'm going to continue the theme, and this final video is going to focus on all the variants that we saw in this line. As you can see, there's quite a few to get through, and these are just the ones I have. There's actually a whole lot more that I'll also be taking a look at. Because when it comes to variants, I think Art Asylum only have a rival in character options, for the amount of times they will release a character with the slightest tweak or paint job. And when it comes to variants, there tends to be two trains of thought. One is that you get a meaningful variant, so the character in a different outfit or costume, maybe a different mould, a different sculpt, that makes us genuinely interesting and worthwhile having in the collection. The second thought is that, well, you're getting a slight tweak. You might be getting a figure that's pretty much identically the same but has a different paint job, or a very slight tweak in the sculpt, or perhaps just a different accessory. And in this scenario, it's really the toy company who's winning, because they're producing the same figure over and over again and packaging it as if it's something new and expecting collectors to buy it. And I think, in all honesty, the truth lies somewhere in between of these two extreme options, because it is true that a lot of toy companies do this, and indeed it is a business strategy to make sure that they can maximise profits, and hey, who can blame them? And in a lot of cases this pays for other new figures to be produced, so collectors generally support it, and collectors usually get a bit of a kick out of having legitimate variants. The trouble comes, I think, when the company just ends up producing variants and just relying on that rather than producing new things to go along with it. And I think with Art Asylum this is something we definitely got to see, because early on there was definitely a huge mix of different characters, different sculpts, and the early waves generally felt quite diverse and quite exciting because you never quite knew what you're going to get in a wave. But as time went on, newer characters became far and few between, and what we ended up getting was just lots of reissues and tweaks to these characters. And when you have a universe as big as Star Trek, you definitely want to populate this out, so I do think that the Star Trek Art Asylum line was an example of variant fatigue. That being said, I'm going to take a look at some of these variants today, and you can make up your own mind about whether they're worth pursuing or not. Now, the first Captain Kirk release was actually in his green share, as we saw in the first video of this series. But the first official variant would be this exclusive premiere edition of Captain Kirk in his traditional yellow outfit. I can't remember now whether this was a mail-away exclusive or a convention exclusive, but this is how he came in one of these little boxes. As you can see, the box itself is very simple. It just has it's just black and white. There's no colour on it for a start, and it just has an image of the figure in the insignia on the front, and on the reverse, some of his bits and pieces that he comes with, such as his phaser and his communicator, etc. So here he is in all his glory, and I have to say I think this is a pretty fantastic figure really. The gold tunic is very bright, it has a nice wash running through it as well, so it's got like two tones going through it, so it looks very gold but also very colourful. The head sculpt again is, I think, exactly the same as the one we'd seen previously in the green shirted Kirk, and I think the paint apps are more or less the same. There seems to be a slight more of a goldy hue to the flesh tone on the green shirted Kirk, but otherwise they look pretty much the same to me. As with most of the figures in this line, he has the rubber tunic, which is actually really good. I think it worked really well on these figures, and goes some way to hide some of the articulation points as well, which is a strong plus. Now in terms of the articulation scheme, it is pretty much the same for all of these figures, so what I'll do is I'll run through it once here, and then if there's anything different in any of the other figures I'll just point it out. So it does have that ball jointed neck, meaning of course he can look up and down from side to side, which is really good. He's also got the ball jointed shoulders there, so of course they arch up and out, which is great. He's got the swivel at the bicep, he's got the single jointed elbow, he's got a swivel at the hand but there's no hinge. And he also has a joint in the middle of his chest there that allows him to move from side to side and up and down very slightly. There's just a swivel at the hips, meaning they just kick forwards, they don't really kick backwards, and they don't arch out to the side either. He does have a swivel just above the knee though, and he's also got a single jointed knee there as well, which bends to about 90 degrees, which is pretty solid. He's also got an extra swivel at the boot there, and then he has a hinge at the foot, meaning they can kick forwards and backwards, but they can't swivel, it's not a pivot. Now most of these figures come with the same accessories, including a phaser, communicator, tricorder, usually some sort of extra hand or two, and in the case of this exclusive, we get the phaser rifle. Now, I've always loved the phase rifle, even though it only makes that one appearance in Where No Man Has Gone Before, but it's such a great design, and it's so iconic because it shows up in lots of the promotional images for the show, which is fantastic. And I think they've done a really nice job of it here as well. There's some nice little details there, some extra little colours on the buttons as well, and yeah, I think this looks really, really nice. And thanks to that extra hand, he holds it perfectly. It fits like a glove, nice and snug in there, no danger of it coming out. And he can actually grip it with both hands, because the other hand can extend out and just grip the rim of the barrel there, which looks really cool. So I think they've done a fantastic job of this, and I think it looks really nice. This is one of my favourite figures, actually, in the whole line. But I always thought it was such an odd choice that his most definitive look, his famous look of being in the gold tunic, since that's what he wore for most of the series, is in fact the one they made an exclusive. It seemed a bit odd, since as much as I love the green shirt of Kirk, and it's quite a different look, and it's quite cool that they released that as their first carded figure, it's probably the one that would have been more suited to being a variant, as an exclusive release. Well, that was until they went ahead and released this figure, which is basically the same figure. This is the battle ravaged Captain Kirk. So it's basically the same figure. It even comes with that phase rifle there. The only difference is, of course, that he actually has a little bit of blood dribbling down his face and his mouth, and a little bit of battle damage to his tunic. So this is a bit of a sneaky way of getting a general release on this figure. Now, it is a legitimate variant because the paint job is very different, so I know if I hadn't been able to pick up my exclusive, in inverted commas, version, then I would have been a bit disappointed I never got him just in his gold tunic. But as we would see, they would go on to release many different versions of Captain Kirk in his gold tunic. Very early on in the line, they introduced the Mirror Universe figures, and one of the first was Captain Kirk. We can see straight away there's actually a brand new mould here and some brand new pieces to this figure. Most noticeably in the arms. Of course, these are bare arms. The other arms of the figures actually had wrinkles in them to replicate the ruffles that happen in a shirt, and here we actually have the replication of skin. The rubber tunic is also brand new, and of course is replicating what we see on screen. It's actually got a very nice paint wash in it, so it's not just one gold piece, it's actually got a little bit of a white or a silver wash running through it, again just giving it a little bit more texture and a bit more detail, which is really nice. Plus I like some of these details that we can see, like the medals and the insignia, which are really quite nicely done. But again, it is a rubber piece, which is nice, so it just slides over there and hides some of the articulation, but it fits really well and looks quite good. At the base of the tunic, we actually have this tassel. Again, it's all a rubber piece. They're not separate pieces, it's just one, but it looks very good, it looks very presentable, and of course, it is very malleable, being rubber there as well. Now, you may notice he has a dagger, which actually attaches to this. This is very cleverly designed. It basically just punches through, so it's a plastic case that holds the dagger, but it just slides through an opening in the rubber piece that holds it together nice and securely. And whilst we're talking about the dagger, this is a nice little extra piece. This is unique to the Mirror Universe figures. It's very nicely sculpted. There's not a lot in the way of paint apps, but they've done a nice job of replicating it, and it slides nicely into his pouch, but also into the hand that grips it as well. Nice and snug. There's no danger here of it falling out. It's not loose at all, and it looks really good. And the grip on the hand is so good, you can actually hold the dagger in either position. You can have it holding up or downwards, and it fits very nicely either way. So this is a really good mould. Another key difference is the boots on this figure. As you'll see, these are a lot taller boots, and the knee joint actually goes beneath where the boots end, which is kind of cool. Now with this, they also have the swivel, and that is at the top of the boot. Sadly, as a consequence, there is just the one swivel in the legs on these figures. But the articulation still works well, and it is well disguised by having it at the top of the boot. Once more, there's absolutely no changes to the sculpt. This is the same sculpt as on the previous two figures, but the paint apps are a little bit different. And actually, I think they're a little bit better, more true to life on this Mirror Universe figure. I think they've got a better judge of the flesh tone. Looks pretty solid, yeah. So I have to say, I think this is a really good example of a worthwhile variant, a variant that a lot of fans are going to want, and I think he's worth investing in because although it is the same head sculpt, everything else about this figure is very different, it's very distinct, it's quite unique, and I think the colours and everything justify this being a completely different version of this character that, yeah, most of us are going to want. Keeping with this mirror theme, we have the Spock figure. This was another one that was released early on, and once again I think this is a significantly different variant. At first glance, it looks like this is a completely different head sculpt. In fact, I think it's the same head sculpt, but it's just had the beard moulded on top of it. But that said, I think this is pretty good. For some reason, it looks a little bit sharper, I think, on the Mirror Universe Spock than it does on the single carded release. And I think a lot of that has to do with the paint apps, because once again, I think the paint apps are just a little bit sharper, a little bit more true to life in the Mirror Universe version than we have in the standard Spock figure. Again, we can see some distinct differences in the tunic. Of course, there is that rubber material again, which is really good. And of course, he's got the insignia and the different medals on the side there. But we can see there's actually a little bit of a like white paint wash that's gone over this, just to give it that lift-in feel, give it a little bit of a different texture. And I think this is quite successful. And they've run this throughout the arms of the figure as well, which is really cool. Something else that's quite different about this figure is the extra hands we get. So we don't get the Vulcan salute this time with this Spock. Instead, we get this sort of cupped hand and this outright palm, which I think is really cool, because I don't think they ever released these kind of hands with any other of the figures in the line. So this is distinctly different to this Spock. Now, I'm not quite sure why he has both of these. I can't remember. There's a moment in the episode where he does this pose. But one of the reasons I like it is that it kind of acts as a Vulcan nerve pinch. Now, it's not strictly accurate because he does use the V in his fingers when he's doing that, but, you know, it creates that, more or less creates that effect. So I'm not sure if that is intentional, whether that's just me utilising it in this way. But nevertheless, I do think it's really cool to have a different hand sculpt here, quite significantly different, which is really cool. Okay, and last up in my mirror figures is Scotty. I think overall this figure has a lot less unique pieces to it. There's nothing really that stands out as being significantly unique to this figure. It seems to be a mismatch of the two, the standard figure and the mirror figures that we've just seen there, but it definitely doesn't feel as distinctive as the others. He was also another mail away or convention exclusive. He wasn't a standard carded release anyway. But I'm pleased to say that his boxes are a lot more exciting and more appealing than the premiere edition of Captain Kirk from Where No Man Has Gone Before. I like the image, I like the colouring on this, and I think it's tried to capture something of the feel of the show, certainly with those primary colours beaming down in the background, so I think they've done a nice job. Meanwhile, on the side panel we can see the different items that come with this figure. Whilst on the other side panel, we can see the nice emblem there of the dagger going through the globe, which I think is really cool of the Mirror Universe. I like that a lot. And the back of the packaging has, well, nothing going on. And as you can see, here's a close-up of the tunic here. So this is really very much a very simple design. Again, it's accurate to what we see in the show, so that's no fault of Art Asylum. But it is pretty much just the standard Scotty figure with the emblems on his chest there and the rubber bandana that goes around the waist. Comparing him here to the standard release, you could be forgiven for thinking that actually this is a different sculpt, but I think it's the same sculpt, it's just been painted differently, and it really shows the power of paint apps and what the difference that can make, because I do think with the mirror figure they're much more finely attuned, much more lifelike. I think particularly in the eyes, for example, they've just done a much better job of bringing the sculpt to life. So I think of the two, he has the better head, so it might be worth you picking up for that alone. Now, sadly, that's all I have from the mirror figures, but they did go on to do pretty much everyone in the crew. So they did, obviously, Mirror Sulu, Chekhov, and Dr. McCoy. Nothing too distinctly different about these figures from what we've already seen, but there's a couple in this wave that actually are significant variants, like the Kirk and Spock. So first up we have Uhura. Again, we can see this is a completely brand new body mold for her, and it's very distinctive. The head is pretty much the same, but everything else, the legs, the torso, the arms, all brand new. And most importantly, we have Marlena Moreau. Now obviously this is a brand new character. This is the only version we get of this character. There's no other variants, and like all these other figures here in this wave, they were all convention exclusive, so very, very difficult to pick them up. But of all of these Mirror Universe figures, she is the most significant because, of course, she is an original character that we never see again. Overall, I think these are a very nice set. Definitely there's a few standouts here. Obviously, Marlena, I think Uhura, Kirk and Spock. Sadly, so many of these are just impossible to get your hands on. They weren't convention exclusives. They weren't re-released in any way, shape or form. And sadly, I think a lot of us have gone without completing that set because they're quite a nice bunch. Next up, we have Kirk in his ceremonial uniform. Now, this figure was released as part of a 2-pack with Khan, in his gold tunic, and if you want to see that figure, check out my previous video because I look at him there. But for Kirk, not too many differences here. Really, it is just a change of the rubber tunic with those medals. And it's nicely done, it's nicely painted, the paint apps are very fine, and it looks good in the main. I think it's one of those that works better in the show. It looks a little bit strange and a bit silly in toy form. And as you can see here, again, it is the same head sculpt, just the paint apps are different. And I have to say, I do think the paint apps are better. It definitely has a more healthy flesh tone to his face. And it's nice to see that there is a subtle difference in the shading of the green between the green shirted Kirk and this ceremonial outfit, so this is pretty good. Hard to say how I feel about this figure really. I really bought this set for the Gorn. It was the Gorn variant that I really wanted out of the two. But at the same time, I do appreciate them putting him in this outfit. It is a very different outfit, and he actually wears it a couple of times in the series as well, so it wasn't just a one-off. I wouldn't have bought it if it was a single carded figure, but being part of this 2-pack, I'm actually kind of glad I've got him in the collection in hindsight. Next up, we have Kirk from Arena. This was released as part of a special 2-pack which repackaged the Gorn figure. What's the difference with Kirk this time? Well, it is pretty much a straight re-release of the gold tunic Kirk, except this time there's a little bit of dirt thrown on his torso and on his face. Once again, this is the same head sculpt, although it does look significantly different. I did have to look at these very, very closely to work out whether it was a new sculpt or not. It's very, very clever paint apps. So to give Kirk that impression of his hair being slightly ruffled, they've just painted onto his forehead some strands of hair there, which is actually really very effective. The skin tone is a lot brighter, again, a lot more naturalistic than his first single-carded green shirt Kirk. And then he's been given some muck around his face, a little bit of stubble there, a little bit of dirt thrown in for good measure. And I have to say, they've done a fair job of approximating what we see on screen, actually. And this detailing of the mud running through the figure is pretty strong. So we can see it again on his pants. There's a little bit of a wash going through them to make him look a little bit dusty and dirty. And on the hands, you can see it on the knuckles and on the fingers there as well. Now for me, this is an example of a figure where the variant thing is being stretched a little bit. I honestly wouldn't have bought this figure if it was single carded. The reason I wanted to pick this up was to get the Gorn, and I think for anyone who missed out on the Gorn first time around, then this was a cool second chance, and having Kirk thrown in, all battle damage, I think is fair enough. But for anyone who'd already bought the Gorn, or already had the gold tunic Kirk, then yeah, I can't imagine why anyone would want to pick this up really. Just because it's not distinctive enough, it's not different enough to warrant it. And then moving on finally to the Amok Time 2-pack with Kirk and Spock. Now obviously, Amok Time is one of those key classic episodes, very distinctive and iconic in its own right, so I can see the impulse for wanting to make a special release of these two. Obviously, the key thing to note about the Kirk this time around is, of course, he has the rip in the shirt and the cut of the blade across the chest there. So this is quite nicely done. One thing to point out is that he does actually have unusually a hard plastic torso, which I'm guessing has been done because they want to create that battle damage effect, but I actually think it probably would have been more effective to have actually used this one as the rubber piece and have the cut exposed skin underneath, but it wasn't meant to be. So it does feel a little bit different, does stand out a little bit in the collection. I don't quite like it, to be honest. I can actually see from this figure just how much of a benefit it is having those rubber pieces on these figures. It definitely has a nicer texture and feel to them for sure. Once again, it is of course the same mould, the same head sculpt of Captain Kirk that we saw from the very first release, and across all of these figures, it never seems to have been updated. Again, I said in the first video, I thought this was a pretty strong mould anyway, so that's no bad thing in my opinion. But again, here I do think the paint apps are better, he has a healthier flesh tone, and yeah, it looks pretty strong. Probably worth pointing out there are a few different paint apps on the trousers and on the boots to create that dusty look, so there's a little bit of a paint wash in there going through them to just look a little bit dirty, a little bit dusty. However, I have got to point out that he is missing a crucial point of articulation. There is no swivel in the waist anymore. That hard piece in the chest and in the torso means that we've lost a key point of articulation here. And then finally we have the accompanying Spock from Amok Time. Again, as we can see, there's some little tweaks on this figure here to make him unique to this set. He does have the same hard body as Captain Kirk, and they have reused the same sculpt as we saw on the original single-carded Spock figure. And as I said in my first video, I'm not a huge fan of this sculpt, to be honest. I think it's leaving a lot to be desired in terms of Leonard Nimoy's likeness, but it's a decent approximation, it will do the job. The only distinguishing feature of this Spock is the paint apps to create a little bit of mud around the face and on the body. And you can see that dirty wash just streaking through the tunic every now and again. We can see a little bit of streaks there, which, you know, it looks pretty good to be fair. It definitely looks dusty. And of course, Spock also has the belt there with the tassels hanging down. Now, disappointingly, this is a very hard plastic, so the whole torso is hard plastic like Captain Kirk, but also so is the tassels, so there's no give on these whatsoever, which just feels a bit plasticky, a bit cheap, and yeah, not great. And once again, we can see some of the dirt, apps, the dust, the bit of brown paint that's running through the boots, which does look really good to be fair. This set also boasts a couple of unique extras, such as their fighting sticks and the Vulcan gong thing. Sorry, I can't remember what it's called. It does come with both pieces, and it's quite nice because it actually hangs up and dangles there quite effectively. And of course, it does split apart, so it ends up broken like this, which is very nicely done. So I appreciate the effort here, and I think, you know, the intention is very good. I'm not sure how effective it is in practice though, and the big part of the problem here is the hands. They really struggle to get these big sticks into their hands, so you can kind of about just squeeze it into one hand but not the other one because it's too closed. And, you know, I could force it I suppose, but the stick just seems too thick. I just feel like I'm going to break the thumb off the hand. It's exactly the same with the Spock. Again, you can just about get it in one hand, but you can't really hold it with both, and you need them to be holding it with both hands. And I just think, well, given that it is a 2-pack, it would have been nice if they could have moulded a hand that would have held both of these sticks with ease, or maybe just make the bar a little bit thinner. As I said, I feel like the intention's there to do something quite cool and, you know, fun, but it doesn't quite work for me. I don't like the hard plastic torsos. It doesn't look quite right. It looks just a little bit too chunky. It doesn't look in proportion. And yeah, it doesn't have the same nice texture or feeling to it. Plus, we're missing out on some key articulation. And then the fact that they can't hold these weapons and you can't properly pose them so they look convincingly like they're fighting is a real downer for me. And it takes something that would be really, really cool in theory and just makes it feel a bit of a cash-in. It just feels a little bit cheap and just feels a bit disappointing. But believe it or not, this wasn't to be the end of the variants. There were actually a few more. We did get a mail-away exclusive of Sulu from Where No Man Has Gone Before in his blue tunic. We also saw another Where No Man Has Gone Before 2-pack of Kirk and Spock, this time in their matching gold tunics with the high collar, which I always quite like, to be honest, and I like those phases as well. They're very cool, distinctive phases, so I was very, very tempted to get these, but ultimately I passed because I felt I had enough Kirk and Spocks by this point. They also released this special Kirk in his gold tunic in his command chair, which is very cool to be fair. But sadly, they never released any other figures with their individual piece of the bridge. And I think, you know, if they'd done that, then they could have built like a big bridge set like they were trying to do with the Enterprise line. And I think that would have been really super cool. But if you did get this, sadly, Captain Kirk is sitting on his own. They also released this Amazon exclusive version of Captain Kirk from the Trouble with Tribbles in his dark green tunic. And I think the chair is actually a variant itself. I think some of the paint apps are a little bit different here as well. We did get a single carded version of this figure with the stars or the stripes on the shoulders. But again, for me, this felt like a variant too far. It was too close to the bright green tunic, and it didn't really offer enough to feel sufficiently different and worthwhile picking him up. A slightly better release was this Kirk as a Romulan 2-pack with Spock. But once again, it just feels a little bit like we're being squeezed as fans here because, yeah, we'd already had the Romulan by this point. Having Kirk as a Romulan is pretty cool, but if they just packaged him with the MacLeod Romulan commander, that would have made this a really exciting set. As it is, it's the same Spock figure again. It's the Romulan body with Captain Kirk's head, and it just doesn't feel distinctive enough or worthwhile enough, you know, forking out quite a lot of money for these twin sets to make it worth your while, really. And it's a real shame because I feel like this kind of overdoing its constant release of Kirk and Spock, Kirk and Spock, Kirk and Spock. I think it just was variant fatigue and it just killed the line because people don't want to keep paying for the same characters endlessly. I think you've got to break it up and introduce something new, intersperse it with some new characters to keep it fresh and interesting. And then by all means, you know, recycle back and do something, you know, do a new twist on an old figure. Definitely definitely, I think that's really healthy to do that. But yeah, it just felt too repetitive. Just every single release was a Kirk and Spock 2-pack by this point. And yeah, I think people just abandoned it and sales went down, and it's just a real shame. I think it got into a vicious cycle, and that was the end of it, really. But anyway, I digress. There is my overview of this line of figures. I'm not sure if I missed any. I think I caught all of them. I think it's a fantastic collection. I think we've got, enough different characters in this line as a whole to make it, a fun collection to build. We've got most of the heavy hitters, and we've got a ton of variants here as well. And we managed to collect the crew not just in one universe, but in two, which I think is very cool. So overall, I think, despite a few misses here and there, and, a few issues in terms of likenesses and articulation, overall, I think this is a very solid, fun collection. So if you haven't picked them up, or you've got something missing, I think, they're definitely worth hunting down and completing. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.